So we're on the final stretch with the skeleton crew audience. I managed to somehow, like, I just kind of arrived at lunchtime and there was a big crowd, and now there's like almost nobody. So I reckon
Try to take it personally.
I don't mind. It's good. Like, only the good people stay at the end. So anyway, Cian is my name. Cian by name, Cian by nature. I'm one of the original people behind nearForm, and I'm here today to talk to these fine group of gentlemen about organizational aspects of microservices and transformation and all that stuff. What I'd like to do, just to kind of start off with, I'd love to get like just a snapshot of, you know, what you're working on at the moment, what stage your project or organization is at, and we can take it from there. So if you want to start.
Sure. So yeah, for those of you who are here this morning, really the project that I've most recently been working on was doing a full digital transformation and moving from a complete monolith that was hosted on a data center to using the Strangler pattern to create a full microservices architecture on a public cloud. So really quite an extreme transformation for them in what was a relatively short pace of time.
Yeah, so I've been at TES for 3 years, and over that time completely transformed the entire technology organization from similar sort of starting point through to something that's much more, a lot of similarities to the Zalando story in terms of, we have a set of very small autonomous teams within technology. I think, I'm very, very happy at the point I'm at now in terms of the organization of technology, and what I'm trying to figure out personally is how I get that change driven through up into the business and see if I can get them involved in the way that we work, which is my next challenge.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, obviously I work with Zalando, and I describe Zalando as being the biggest online fashion retailer in Europe at the moment, which is true, but essentially we're changing that business model and really moving from being an online retailer, as in selling directly to customers, to really becoming a platform. So we're the piece in the middle that's connecting merchants, brands, suppliers, producers with consumers, and then potentially further down the road, other individuals potentially around delivery and so on and so forth. So in terms of that strategy, the first pieces of that are really starting to emerge now. So a lot of these things have hit production in the last couple of months. So a lot of the products that our consumers, our customers are consuming are being generated by our microservice-driven architecture.
Cool. So at like Zalando, my understanding is about 2 years ago you started to go, okay, we need to change this if we're going to scale. And TES, I guess, has been at 3 years, and the project that you were on was probably a year. Ish.
Yeah, ish.
Yeah. And one of the things that a lot of people have different opinions about. If you're going to do like a transformation of sorts, the question is, do you go through the organization or do you go around the organization? And there are like benefits. There are pros and cons to both of those things. But like, if you go around the organization, there's an integration point, which is like, oh, right, we have to do this bit now, or else it doesn't work. So I guess what would be interesting is to get your take on, do you go through or around, and what are the pitfalls of both approaches? Do you want to try, Cliff? Start.
Yeah, I guess when I started at TES, I think it's fair to say there were two things. One is despite the fact I had full backing from the owner of the company and was part of the executive board, the reality is they didn't really understand the nature of the organization I was trying to build. I explained to them in terms of outputs and the sort of organization that would be moving quickly and agile and everything else, but they didn't really understand the freedom and structure I was going to be giving to the engineers. And I think if they did, they probably would have run screaming at the time. I think what we did do very quickly, we pulled together a team of people who operated, I think it's been described as like a lighthouse project or lighthouse team, to operate in that way. It was very separate to the rest of the technology organization at the time, but we co-located them, put them in the same place, so that they were sort of an example that other people could look at. And then as we started the wider transformation and integrate that back in, we were able to sort of show people that this new way of working delivered things quickly. The people were happy. Things are moving. There's a real energy to this, which we then kind of tried to pull everybody together around. So I'd say the reality is, if you're going to do a big change, you have to, at some point, you have to do it outside the existing organization. You can't take the whole organization with you at once. But the quicker you bring that in and the closer you keep it so that they can see it. I get the example where you do it in another building, so you're not sort of dragged down by the existing culture, but at the same time, the quicker you can get it back in to provide an example, I think the better off you'll be.
Cool.
Yeah, just echoing that, I think it's crucial for the success to get C-level buy-in to the project that you're going to run and the fact that you're going to do it. But I agree, it's not often clear to them exactly what that's going to mean. We did find it very effective to get that team in isolation so that it didn't get trampled on too much. It could have room to grow and breathe and become itself. But yeah, so I suppose around the organisation to an extent, but it's also really important that you do try and then bring the organisation along with you, and otherwise it just ends up being another silo, and you just create more problems.
How's that integration gone since?
It's going quite well. So the organisation I was working with obviously had departments that were looking after a lot of their sort of point of sale systems as well. So bringing them along the journey has been useful. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is interesting from a Zalando perspective. I've been talking with a few people today, and I've been saying this. I think I'm probably very, very lucky in that the founders of the company, the CEOs, are very, very enlightened individuals. It wasn't a case of me or anybody else on the tech side having to go and educate the executives. It was kind of the other way around. They were kind of really looking to drive the company this direction, and they seen the benefits, and they just wanted to go and make it happen. So Zalando's really cool from that perspective, that it's the type of company, when it makes its mind up, when it sees what it wants, it just goes and makes it happen. So I really admire that about the company. But having said that, if you think about what we've done, if you think about the size of the organization, and to just basically click our fingers one day and say, okay, let's just go do this. I'm not sure I could actually recommend that to people. I think ultimately, personally, I would agree with what the guys are saying. I think for me, do it small, make your mistakes, learn, make it better, and then just let it evolve throughout the organization is what I would recommend.
So it's interesting. I could probably draw like a fairly hard line between Zalando and both of the companies that you guys have been working on, because Zalando is like a 9-year-old company now with DNA that's like 2008 plus. Whereas you guys are dealing with legacy, and you're dealing with organizations that have been around for a long time.
106 years.
106. Nice. Nice. Yeah. Wow. But just in terms of the technology DNA side of things, I think you'd mentioned before, Clifton, that you were starting to show executives like how to write code and things like that. So how is that progressing, that kind of education piece?
Yeah, I guess there's a big part of TES. We're a private equity-owned company, so we have a very clear kind of roadmap around the type of growth we need to drive within a time frame. And a big part of that growth really is about us changing the DNA of the company. Both, obviously the perception externally is important, but the reality is you only achieve that through genuine change. And I think if I look at the company now compared to 3 years ago, it's completely unrecognizable. I think iterative product development and the kind of, the concepts behind it now kind of permeate through the entire exec. The conversations I'm now having with my peers are much more kind of, sensible, forward thinking. It's about us being visionaries and empowering and enabling teams to get stuff done. To have had those conversations 3 years ago with my peers would have been unthinkable. So, I think all of the things that we do as a technology team to make ourselves feel more approachable, to make the things that we're doing feel less like magic, to make everybody within the business recognize that when they want something done, it's just another person sitting over there that's going to do that work, and there's nothing, so we sort of remove all those barriers, and a lot of that's by, us being humble, approachable, displaying empathy towards, the needs of others and, their knowledge and everything else. So, I think that's all instrumental in that transformation.
Yeah, I think for us it was really, really important that we kept the communication really fluid with the management and the other stakeholders, especially as we were sort of outside, to let them know what was going on. There's a lot of fear about doing these kind of new things to begin with, and it was really important. We're like, okay, we're just going to release, there's going to be no test environment, we're going to release everything into production, and their initial reaction is, but how is everything not going to break? How are you going to keep things running and make sure that the existing revenue streams are protected? And so, by showing them how we were going to mitigate risk and how microservices was really going to help them with that was crucial in bringing them on the journey at a pace.
Yeah, so I don't really have anything to add to that from a Zalando perspective. The guys have covered it, yeah.
Nice. So we're talking about Conway there a while ago. Somebody was... I was talking actually with Nick Rockwell a while ago about what they're doing in the New York Times, and he had some previous experiences, and also the guys at USwitch. Guys at USwitch are doing some. Yeah, there's kind of this emergent organizational structure that down the road starts to happen, where the organization starts to center itself around the technology rather than the other way around. So started calling it like a reverse Conway. I don't know if it actually exists or not, but the USwitch guys were supposed to talk at the last event here, and they just disappeared before the event. And they were like, "Arr." This is like going to be a really interesting talk, yeah, it's certainly interesting, like that we're all like from technical backgrounds, and yet we're in these organizations where the kind of technology is starting to define the organization rather than the other way around. Yeah, I was kind of thinking that we could maybe open up a few questions from the audience. I saw a gentleman over there that was waving furiously earlier on, so.
Hi. My question is, how you deal with when you didn't prove yet that you are right and what you're doing is right, and people are fighting back, and this conflict that is going to be created, and people that have power are not willing to open their power for this new way of doing things, and this is like a war zone, the office. How you deal with that?
Sounds like there's some interesting backstory to that question.
Yes, it's where I am moment at the war zone. How you deal with this?
I think, so I'll repeat the question, I think, which was, how do you deal with the interim period between, you've been given the green light to go ahead and do something different, but you haven't yet proved that it works, right? And in that period, the longer you are before that proof, the tougher it gets.
And in the office, it's a clash, because there's people that is with the old status quo that don't want to open the power that they have. There are new people that want to change.
Yeah, that's tough. I guess my recommendation there is what that really highlights is you've got to really pick the thing that you prove, or the thing that you choose to be the proof. You've got to pick that pretty carefully, right? If the core of your business is some incredibly complex multi-jurisdictional payment platform, don't start there. Pick something else that's a bit simpler, and build momentum before you do that, which is in some respects the opposite of what you should do. Tackling the complicated things first. But keep in mind the proof here is not that you can necessarily use this technique to solve the technology problems, but that you can use this technique to solve some of the cultural and people and process problems. So choose the right thing. It sounds like unfortunately you picked the wrong one.
Yeah, so I will add to that. I mean, apologies, I didn't hear the question, but now that I hear it, I think it's a brilliant question. So I think, in hindsight, I look back and I've definitely made mistakes here, because I would have experienced something similar, and I should have known this from a previous experience in another organization. So I can't claim I've done this amazingly well in Zalando, because we did have a period of pain and potentially, levels of frustration and concern started to build, and everybody probably felt that pressure. And we definitely didn't do what I know in hindsight we should have done, and that's just to define that one thing. The smallest possible thing that you can do and that you can achieve, and then just go focus on that and make that happen, because just in doing that you calm everybody's nerves and you prevent all that pressure from coming down on top of yourself. So definitely in hindsight I could have done a better job on that, and I knew that from a previous experience in another organization. I'd already learned that lesson, so that's definitely my recommendation.
Yeah, I've not got much else to add to that, other than to say that probably what you think is the minimum viable product is still way too big. Like, really aggressively look at how can I get that out even quicker? You don't need to do all the things that you need to do to prove that this can work.
My question is regarding, imagine that you have a small company, right? And this small company is about to grow exponentially, and you want to build this management structure. So from the management perspective, the first approach is, this tree hierarchy. How would you transmit to, let's say, the CEO, right, this perspective in a way that they understand what we are talking about? Is there a way that you can, try to get that buy-in? Let's say that this aligns perfectly with the culture of the company, right?
So I assume that was aimed at me. So I think this is difficult. So I've already acknowledged, I think I've in Zalando we've had the benefit of really enlightened ownership and leadership from at an executive level. So this is hard. I mean, the best thing I think I can say to you is use companies like Zalando as an example. I think there are other examples out there. I mean, I know Spotify produced loads of interesting materials, and their story is probably something similar. And so there's two organizations that started small, experienced success, experienced phenomenal growth, and are, I think, doing things differently, certainly compared to a traditional organization. I think you just need to find a way to make the argument. As I said, that's actually, I was concerned I was going to bore everybody with all the science, and maybe I did, but for me, that's absolutely fundamental, because without that in my presentation, it's just a guy saying some stuff about how we work in Zalando. But what the science says is that this is real. It's, we're not making this up. This is very real. It's very solid evidence that, if you want to create this kind of environment, that you really need to focus on these kind of things. And then armed with that, it's really, I think, about your powers of persuasion, unfortunately. And I accept that can be difficult with certain types of individuals.
Yeah, I only add one thing on top of that, which is, I think you've got to seize the right opportunity to have that conversation as well. There'll be points of either where you're trying to push forward further or pivot or do something in your organization where if you can, you'll get the opportunity to articulate that maybe actually if we move these into fully featured product teams where they really own it, we'll be able to do these two things in parallel rather than, sequentially or, and particularly in a high growth small company, these opportunities arrive, and if you get a CEO at the right time versus when he's sitting there trying to, have an argument with the owners or investors, then you're probably more likely to succeed.
Yeah. I'll just come back in on top of that. So if you actually think about that, if you think about the questions and the conversation, so that all starts to add up maybe to answer that question in terms of, start small, identify something small, make it happen, and then you're actually, you're generating evidence potentially to bring to your executives. Yep. That this might work. So, bring them something tangible potentially, but something really, really small.
Are we talking about asking for forgiveness instead of permission?
Potentially.
Like that.
Any advice on that, Joe?
Loads of advice. Too much advice.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add here other than, showing them slides like Dave showed about a successful company like Zalando seems to be a pretty good way to get some buy-in there.
I actually have another question. So a number of years ago, Fred was talking about the Daily Mail and having these pods, these small teams. I assume that you kind of still have that concept in Tez.
Yep.
One of the interesting things, Fred George is quite an outspoken, colourful, ex-thought worker, computer guy. But he talks an awful lot about basically, let's not even think about the technology. It's like how fast can we go all the time. So I was speaking to Fred a while ago, and he was talking about this idea that the organization can actually center itself around the teams, right? So you got these pods, but the organization is there to serve the pods of developers rather than having this hierarchical kind of blame culture or kind of older ways of doing things, and also in some cases like a team or a pod, the people in that team have the right to add people or reject people from their team and stuff like that. Do you guys go that far in terms of that, or?
So again, I think that's a very, very interesting question. So I kind of referenced that, or at least I was hinting at that when I was talking earlier. I mentioned the maturity of a team, and I think you need to factor that in. So there's a lot of papers on this as well that kind of identify the whole spectrum of autonomy or potentially freedom that you could give a team, from making very basic decisions regarding their work all the way through to something actually myself and Joe were just talking about earlier, where maybe the team is actually making hiring decisions and even reward decisions regarding that. But we don't go that far. Even in terms of our most mature teams, we don't have that. But that does not mean that's not something I would not be interested in looking at as we get deeper and deeper into this.
But I guess it goes back to this whole idea. Like if you're working with a team of people, and then somebody from up high hires somebody, and here's your new coworker, and you're like, what the hell? Should we not try and figure out if we can work well with this person first?
So at Tez, we, the teams individually are definitely involved in any hiring decisions. We definitely don't go as far as they're not involved in kind of pay reward decisions, but we copy a lot of what Fred and I tested at the Mail. I do think the important element, thinking of the rest of the organization, and we definitely haven't solved this at Tez, is if you think about all the kind of externalities that drive product development, and particularly launching new products, we still have this problem where we have a marketing department and we have a go-to-market team in our jobs business, and you have all of these groups of people who are operating in a very different way that often causes friction, and we haven't figured out a way really, apart from demos and stand-ups and other kind of normal techniques, of trying to bring these people more firmly into the process, which I think would actually make us move so much faster if we could do that.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things in the project I was recently involved in was how we were going to hire in the people who would ultimately replace us and carry it forwards. And yeah, for us it was very, very important that team fit was there. So we involved as many of the team as we could in the hiring process, invited people to come and meet with us, have a chat with us, do a bit of coding, that kind of stuff, because that could have very, very easily destabilised the project when we were trying to move that fast and hire that many people in. So
Yeah, you can always end up with somebody that interviews really, really well, but it's really like not easy to work with. Like, you know. Is there another question out there?
Hello. So I'm Francesc. First of all, thank you for the amazing day, for the big level of the speeches. So we are from one company that 4 years ago started the transition to microservice, and today we are really close to achieve the continuous delivery. Now, at the moment, we are experiencing the same pain that we were experiencing 4 years ago with the big fat bastard in the backend, with the big fat bastard in the front end. So we are experiencing things like 20 minutes to do the whole compilation, so we are starting to think about componentized things, but the concept of a microservice, the concept of isolation within the browser, in an environment that 3-4 applications are living in the same single page application. So it's something that we are start to feel the need to evolve to, and as I said, we are starting to create the foundation for componentized. But so the transition to the microservice wall in the backend, the tools were there, and the scope is just the virtual machine, let's say it that way. In the front end, I think it's much more complicated, or at least it's hard to see if the community, if someone is already going through that, if someone already realized the problem and it's already going forward on this. Do you have any opinion on that? Any guidance for the poor guys like us that were trying to do that? Thank you.
So what I'm hearing there is, you can have this lovely microservices server side and it's all great and we can deploy it really quickly, but then we get stuck with a monolith front end, and how do you sort of combine those two? So we could have fallen into that trap on my recent project. It was a single page app front end that was talking to all of our microservices. And for us, it was really important that we componentized that front end so that we could benefit from feature flags, and different parts of the UI could be exposed depending on the feature flags that we had. So I wouldn't go as far as to say we had a microservices front end, but we were able to split out bits of that front end so that we could control and incrementally deliver into the front end as well. And that kind of helped avoid that monolithic front end.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a talk I did 3 years ago at NodeConf, I presented actually the same conference I talked about, the way we do front-end service composition, and the guy from Groupon did a similar thing with a different technique. So we have this exact problem. Tez.com is a single thing, but I run like 5 or 6 different businesses on that thing. So you can imagine if we put all that in a single front end, we'd grind to a halt. So we use 2 techniques. One is we split the apps vertically by routes. So basically, if you hit /jobs, you'll hit a separate set of apps, and those apps are effectively smaller services. So we have in both Nginx and our content delivery network, we have some quite complex rules that route based on URL to different back-end applications. We then have a method of sharing common codes, mastheads, footers, core shared libraries and things like that across the different applications to avoid issues with browser caching and things like that. And then even within pages, where specific pages get complicated, we do effectively sort of fragment composition. So effectively you can have like a reviews app embedded in a bigger app, where those 2 things are actually deployed separately and served up separately. So there's a project we have on our GitHub called Composure, COMPOXURE, that is basically like a thin version of something like EdgeSide includes, which we use to do front-end composition, and then we use just React, Redux, and that environment for the rest. It's definitely doable, but it does add its own complexity.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Again, I was in a conversation earlier today where this came up. So, and actually listening to the guys as well. So I think we can say with a certain amount of certainty that this seems to be a pattern. So this is definitely something we've encountered, similar to what Dave has said. We're really looking at using feature flags in the UI. This is problem is probably a little bit deeper for us as well, in that this actually, even at an organizational level, in terms of how we were structured with business units and stuff, this was even a factor. And we've even had to look at our structure and even restructure ourselves so that, we have dedicated owners within kind of vertical slices of the company. And so this is kind of starting to help with some of these issues now.
Anyone else?
Hello. I have a question on autonomous teams. Basically, how can we prevent autonomous teams from over-engineering solutions?
From over-engineering solutions, is that?
Over-engineering. So basically, say, we know, say, a particular feature, if, it might take 2 sprints, but the team decides, let's do it in a fancy way, and let's take 10 sprints to do it. Again, it's a team decision, so how do we get around that?
Yeah, so this comes back to so again, a great question. It comes back to the issue of leadership around the team. So if you remember the slide I had up of the 3 leaders around the team, so there are specifically 2 of those 3 leaders with impact here. So one is the product owner, who should have a strong sense of what it is that we need. So we should be able to make a judgment call in terms of, well, are we over-engineering this or not? There should be an awareness around the team, certainly within, from the product owner. So we go through it, yeah, we go through a process of, not quite a sprint, but of weekly demos, just to make it visible what's there, what we're building as the feature starts to emerge. So I would hope at that point that, if that issue exists, that we would start to catch that. But also there's the delivery lead, who is the individual that coaches, guides from a technical perspective the team on all issues related to delivery. So this is a question of style. You have to be careful because, of course, potentially that's a really great thing. A team trying to make the feature as good as possible, and they come up with some additional ideas, and you don't necessarily want to stop that from happening, because potentially maybe that additional 20% the team is giving is exactly the thing that's going to make this feature great. So, as leaders, you don't want to go in and undermine the team, but, we make our work visible. There are leaders around the team trying to protect for this, and we as smart, creative, intelligent people working on things together, we make judgment calls on, do we need this, do we not need this, but essentially that's a decision that should sit with the team, but is influenced by some of the external leaders around the team.
Yeah, I'd echo that exactly. I think the only thing I'd add is, if teams are doing that, then to me it's a symptom that they're disconnected from the output. The motivation of delivering this feature to the users or making that metric change, it feels like they're disconnected from it. So what I've found is that if a team is both empowered and connected to the business outcomes, and they feel that their actions are changing those and driving the business forward, then actually most of the time these people are professionals, they're intelligent people, they tend to make the right decisions.
Yeah, really just echoing what's already been said here. For me, that is a symptom that the team isn't communicating well enough. There's always going to be a tension between the product owners, the architects, and people who permanently want to refactor everything. And it really is a case of aligning that team towards the overall business goals, and then hopefully, everyone being a professional person, they can agree on what the right balance is there and how much time they should spend on those different objectives. Yep.
I have one more question. I guess we're eating into beer time now. So one more question. Last time I was on stage, I think with yourself and Jason, and I can't, oh yeah, there was another guy. But I asked the question, you know, what's your definition of a microservice? So I'm always interested, like 12 months later, to hear what your definition of a microservice is again. You can start.
So a microservice is an independent process that defines a particular context and serves a particular function as part of an overall solution.
Yeah, I guess the smallest set of features within a domain that delivers some business value. Yeah.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, so it's the smallest set of features, a function that delivers a piece of business value. Yeah.
And so is there a particular size for like above which it's not a microservice anymore? It's like something else, or are we getting into dodgy territory now? Like how micro is your micro?
They're pretty big, actually.
Are they?
We definitely, I think, the one thing we've learned over time, I mean, when we first started 3 years ago, we built things really small, and what we found is we even use the term internally now, mini monolith, because actually there's some things that just the cost of breaking them apart, you know, the reality is it's the same team who work on them, they change at the same velocity, you just don't get the benefit. So we've actually had, in a few instances, brought things together that we'd previously broken apart, just because it made the team more productive. So we don't have a definition of size, but we just keep an eye on things.
So for me, I think a microservice is too large when it's harder to change a feature in one thing than it would have been if you'd changed it in two places in two microservices, and that's the time to split. So there's no one size for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that statement. For me, I think that's right. But again, one of the things with autonomous teams, I guess, you know, you will even see in Zalando, some teams have a slightly different definition of what it is, and so I'm aware of one team. I can't remember the exact figure, but they would even, in terms of size, they have a X number of lines of code. Anything bigger than that, we got a problem. And I can't remember what the value of X was, but it was under 100, you know. But that was one particular team. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's it. I was going to ask one more question, which is, do you have any microservice jokes?
Do we have any microservice jokes?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we save those for the bar?
There has to be some microservices jokes out there, like.
None that I know of.
No.
It sounds like you have one, though.
I'm asking the questions now. No, my joke is so bad that I'll tell it to you at the bar. Okay. It's that bad. You need a pint before you can listen to it. Otherwise, you'd probably like slap me or something. Anyway, like to say thanks to everyone. Like the speakers today have been great. Travelled from all over the world to be here. The presentation is fantastic, and yeah, just delighted that it's come off so well. If you see anyone sees Cliona or Sean or the nearForm team outside later on, you can like clap them on the back. They've done a great job here today. So thanks everyone.